Imagine economies unraveling, trade routes freezing, jobs vanishing by the millions. Nations buckle under debt, social unrest rises, and the international system, once stable, fractures. Now imagine that economic breakdown acting as a fuse, lighting a global war, not over ideology, but survival, resources, trade access, national collapse. This is the story of how economic collapse can become the spark for global conflict. Over the next hour, we'll explore the causes of economic collapse, how it weakens states and sets the stage for war. We'll map potential flashpoints, examine historical precedents, run through worst-case scenarios toward 2050, and finally, look at what actions might avert the slide into conflict. Number 1. What is economic collapse and why it threatens stability? An economic collapse is not merely a recession. It is a sustained breakdown of economic output, financial systems, trade networks, and social safety nets. When GDP plummets, unemployment soars, debt becomes unpayable, banking systems freeze, states lose legitimacy and capacity. Research shows strong links between economic shocks and conflict. For example, a review finds that adverse economic shocks increase the risk of violent conflict, especially in states with weak institutions. An article by the World Economic Forum warns that a prolonged economic crisis combined with inequality could well escalate into large-scale military conflict. When a country's economy collapses, government revenues collapse, welfare, pensions, health systems fail. Social unrest rises, legitimacy collapses, internal cohesion weakens. States become vulnerable externally, unable to defend trade routes or secure resources. In the globalized world, economies are intertwined. A collapse in one major economy sends shocks through supply chains, banks, and financial markets globally. Researchers have modeled how cascading failures in global finance could amplify these risks. So the stage is set. Economic collapse isn't just domestic ruin. It's a destabilizing global factor with war-making potential. Number 2. How economic collapse erodes state power and creates conflict incentives. Economic collapse weakens states in multiple ways. Loss of tax base, inability to pay military or police, security vacuums, social contract breaks, public services fail, unemployment surges, unrest begins, diversionary politics, and scapegoating. External dependency increases. Nations rely more on external trade, resources, credit, vulnerability to external pressure or coercion. At the same time, economic collapse creates incentives for war, resource grabs. When internal production fails, states may seek external resources via force. Diversionary war. Leaders facing domestic crisis may initiate external conflict to rally populations. Power vacuums. Weakened states invite aggression. Opportunistic rivals exploit collapse. In the concept of economic motivations for armed conflict, access to scarce resources, trade routes, and economic markets are identified as major triggers. Thus, collapse doesn't guarantee war, but dramatically raises the odds. Number 3. Historical precedents, economic collapse, and war. Let's trace some examples. The Great Depression, 1929. Economic collapse, mass unemployment, rise of extremist politics, collapse of order in Europe, ultimately led to World War II. The research on post-conflict countries shows that severe economic slowdowns increase the risk of renewed violence. Modern example, the war in Sudan began with power struggle, but economic implosion deepened the conflict. The economy shrank by up to 40%, and food systems collapsed. In a broader context, the Kiel Institute for the World Economy shows that wars themselves cause huge economic damage, but pre-existing economic fragility significantly raises war risk. These cases show a pattern. Collapse weakens state, creates crisis, invites conflict. We can use these patterns to anticipate future risk. Number 4. Global economy 2025 to 2050. Stress points and fragilities. Looking ahead, what aspects of the global economy raise the risk of collapse that could spark war? Debt burdens. Many advanced and emerging economies carry unsustainable public and private debt. Trade disruption. Global supply chains are long, complex, brittle. A major shock, pandemic, conflict, climate can freeze flows. Resource dependencies. Nations dependent on a single export, oil, minerals, are vulnerable to price collapse. Inequality and social fragmentation. Economic collapse hits working classes hardest. Social unrest rises. Geopolitical economic rivalries. Economic conflict over trade, currency, access to markets serve as war triggers. For instance, the WEF notes that economic crisis may unleash military conflict. We also have the concept of a doom loop, where negative economic factors reinforce each other. If major economies fail to reform, that loop could tip a state into collapse and heighten war risk. Number 5. Scenario modeling. Economic collapse, triggering war by 2050. Let's imagine two contrasting scenarios ahead. Scenario A. Debt implosion leads to resource. War. A major economy hits debt ceiling, currency crashes, unemployment spikes. The leadership diverts attention outward, invades resource-rich neighbor to gain revenue, triggering wider war. Scenario B. Trade collapse and escalation. Global trade collapse, due to climate shock or systemic banking failure, causes mass layoffs in export-reliant states. They lash out at transit states controlling choke points, triggering military conflict. Scenario C. Internal breakdown becomes international conflict. A state's economy collapses. State fragments. External powers intervene for resources, strategic advantage. Civil war spills across borders, becoming interstate war. These are not science fiction. They align with academic modeling and historical echoes of collapse-era conflict. Number 6. Potential flashpoints. Where collapse could link to war, which regions and states are especially vulnerable? Highly indebted emerging economies with weak institutions. States heavily reliant on single commodity exports. Economies tied to global trade network that could break countries with external dependencies for food/energy. For instance, a commodity-dependent state facing global price crash becomes desperate, seeks territorial compensation. A trade-export economy hit by protectionism and supply chain collapse resorts to force to open markets. Number 7. Preventive strategies. Avoiding economic collapse and war. What can leaders, institutions, and societies do? Strengthen economic resilience. Diversify economy. Reduce debt. Build buffers. Reform institutions. Transparent governance. Inclusive growth. Social safety nets. Manage resource dependencies. Ensure access. Strategic reserves. Cooperation. Rebuild global economic cooperation. Trade frameworks. Crisis ladders. Cooperation rather than rivalry. Early warning and mediation. Monitor economic stress as security risk. Diplomatic channels ready. Economic policy is also national security policy. Number 8. Conclusion. The choice ahead. Economic collapse is not just a financial crisis. It can be the match that lights global war. The choices governments and societies make now on debt, trade, institutions, cooperation will determine whether we drift toward collapse or steer toward resilience. In a highly interconnected world, collapse in one economy can ripple globally, and in that ripple lies the risk of war. Will the next great conflict begin with bombs or with bankruptcy?